Welcome to the State of Wyoming Subject Matter Minute, where we cover a wide variety of subjects related to State of Wyoming employment. This information is for you and me, the state employee. From hidden benefits to systems and processes, we'll make your job easier by giving you the lowdown, the how-to, and hopefully entertain you a bit along the way. And now, today's Subject Matter Minute.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Subject Matter Minute. I'm Matt Nagy. Thanks for joining me. Today's show is going to be a little bit long, so I'm going to jump right in. Today, I want to talk about accommodation. Before we get started, I want to thank Russell Webb of HRD for helping me understand the definitions and the processes for accommodation. Thanks, Russ. There are two areas protected under the law that accommodation can be requested for, and that's disability and religion. And under Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, a reasonable accommodation is a modification or adjustment to a job, the work environment, or the way things are usually done during the hiring process. These modifications enable an individual with a disability to have an equal opportunity to get a job and to successfully perform their job to the same extent as somebody without a disability. The law also requires an employer to reasonably accommodate an employee's religious beliefs or practices. This means an employer may be required to make reasonable adjustments to the work environment to allow for an employee to practice his or her religion. For both disability and religion, an employer does not have to provide reasonable accommodation if it imposes an undue hardship. Okay. An undue hardship is defined as an action requiring significant difficulty or expense when considered in light of factors such as the employer's size, financial situation, or resources, and the nature and structure of its operation. So, of course, that will vary by agency at the state. An employer also doesn't have to provide reasonable accommodation unless the employee asks for it. Okay. The employer can start the conversation if there's a safety issue, and if a supervisor believes that there's a medical issue causing performance or conduct problems, he or she can ask if there's something they can do or if they need an accommodation. However, if the employee says that they do not want or need an accommodation, the conversation should stop there. Okay, so the process generally begins with an employee requesting an accommodation. The supervisor then has 30 days to follow up with the employee. If the supervisor or the employer does not, they are said to have refused accommodation. Okay, and this opens up the state to liability. So after the employer gets back with the employee then has 30 days to get back again with the employer. Okay, if the employee fails to do so, they forfeit their right to the accommodation. However, they can start the process all over again by simply requesting an accommodation. Okay, so the key here with accommodation is that the employee must be able to perform their essential or the essential functions of the job as they're written in the job description. Okay, so that means if the issue is with a non-essential function of their job, this can be reassigned to another employee. Okay, that's a type of accommodation. However, essential functions cannot be reassigned. So that's when other types of accommodation come into play. The state doesn't necessarily have to provide the preferred accommodation if there's something else that allows for the performance of the job's essential duties or meets the needs. Okay, there are generally 4 things you need to consider when considering accommodation. Okay, that's cost, function, safety, and scheduling. How much might this cost, right? Are the essential functions being met? Are there any safety concerns? And does the schedule change work for everyone involved? Also, there are some agencies that have seniority systems or collective bargaining agreements, and those can supersede requests for schedule changes. Also, employers are not required to displace another employee to provide accommodation. For example, if there's no room on that shift that doesn't work on Saturdays, and that's the time the person wants off, the employer is not required to force somebody on that shift to trade shifts. Okay. And the employer is not required to create a job. Okay. There must be an existing opening. Again, employers don't have to provide the requested accommodation, just something that meets the needs and allows the employee to do the essential functions of that job. The agreed upon accommodation is for the length of employment unless it's noted otherwise. An example of a short one would be a temporary one would be a short-term medical condition. I mentioned in the beginning that there are two areas that accommodation can be requested for: disability and religion. Religion is often for scheduling, okay? Requesting to not work on a day of the week that your religious activities typically happen on. I think we often think of that as being Sunday, but it could be any day of the week given different religions, okay? And it could be temporary as well. A good example is Ramadan. This is a situation where a scheduling change could help someone get their work done while they're fasting. Okay. Other reasons for religious accommodation are things such as clothing or displaying items in your office. As an example of this, an employee at the state said he should not have to wear a hard hat because his religious beliefs have him wearing a head covering. Okay, the head covering wouldn't allow for the hard hat to go on. Okay. After some research and engaging in the interactive process with the employee, it was discovered that that was actually a preferred head covering and that there was another head covering that could work under the hard hat. So he eventually agreed to wear this other head covering that permitted him to wear the hard hat. Remember, safety trumps all else. You will not get an accommodation if there's a safety issue. I think it's fairly standard for us to think that providing accommodation could be cost prohibitive. Well, it turns out that that's actually not true. The typical cost or the average cost of accommodation is about $500. A 2020 survey report by the Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy showed that 56% of accommodations actually cost zero. The remaining on average, like I said, were about 500. So I'm going to go through a few examples of accommodation with how much they cost. Okay. So example one, an office employee with limitations in using her hands found it difficult to operate a computer mouse. So the solution was they arranged for a foot operated computer mouse, foot pad, and speech to text software. The accommodation was successful and it cost about $300. Another example, an office worker with cold sensitivity was experiencing pain in the head and neck because of the office temperature. The solution was the employer switched off the air conditioning vent above them and rerouted another one and also provided them a heated scarf. The cost of that accommodation was about $115. Another example, a professor with a mental health problem was finding it hard to concentrate at the workplace. The professor operated in a shared environment and the cause was frequent interruptions. So the solution was they got him his own office. The cost of that was zero. All right, another example, county government employee with a kidney disorder requested to work remotely because of the need to take frequent breaks, and also it was hard to commute to work. So the solution was they let him telework and provided computer work to set up at home, or computer equipment to set up at home. That was actually zero because you already had that equipment and just took it home. One more example. An employee working in a lab environment was finding it hard to communicate with colleagues because of a progressive hearing loss. I can understand that one. The solution was the coworkers were asked to first make sure he was looking at them before they started talking. And in addition, every verbal communication was followed by written email communication. So in this scenario, everyone benefited because there was a written record of what was said. Cost of that accommodation, zero. All right, I'm out of here. I hope that this helps supervisors that have to deal with this sort of thing, and also any folks who might need an accommodation at the state. Thanks for watching the Subject Matter Minute. I'll see you next time.
You have been watching the Subject Matter Minute with Matt Nagy. Please help us out by subscribing. And join us next month when we'll cover another topic of interest for all state of Wyoming employees. Again, thank you for joining us on the Subject Matter Minute.